Oxidation and reduction. Dear student, in this session, we have to understand the phenomena oxidation and reduction. These are two types of chemical reactions. These are two types of chemical reactions that often work together. Oxidation and reduction reactions involve an exchange of electrons between reactants. Dear student, in these both of chemical phenomena like oxidation and reduction, there we will find exchange of electrons between reactants. In oxidation and reduction reactions, exchange of electrons takes place between reactants. What is the difference between oxidation and reduction? Dear student, let us understand difference between oxidation and reduction. Dear student, reduction and oxidation occur simultaneously in a type of chemical reaction called reduction oxidation or redox reaction. Dear student, when both of these chemical phenomena, reduction and oxidation, occur simultaneously, then these are known as redox reaction. Here what happens? The oxidized species loses electrons, and whereas the reduced species gains electrons. The oxidized species loses electrons, and the species which get reduced gains electrons. Oxidation is a gain of oxygen and also loss of hydrogen, loss of electrons, and increase in oxidation number. Whereas reduction is a loss of oxygen, gain of hydrogen, and gain of electrons, a decrease in oxidation number. Here oxidation is a gain of oxygen, whereas reduction is a loss of oxygen. Oxidation is a loss of hydrogen, whereas reduction is a gain of hydrogen. In case of oxidation, loss of electrons takes place. In case of reduction, gain of electrons takes place. Eventually, an increase in oxidation number is important characteristic feature of oxidation, whereas in case of reduction, there is a remarkable decrease in oxidation number. So by these factors, we can differentiate both of these phenomena. By all these factors, we can differentiate oxidation and reduction. Dear student, here is an activity that possesses the process of oxidation and reduction. In this activity, we will understand oxidation and reduction. This is a very simple activity. Here, you have to take a china dish containing 1 gram of copper powder. Then, you have to keep the china dish on a wire gauge and heat it. Then, we will find the changes. After heating, we observe that the copper powder becomes coated with black color. When we heat the copper powder, it gradually turns into black color. This black colored powder is copper oxide. The black powder of copper oxide then turns brown. Later on, the same black powder of copper oxide turns into brown color. This is how the oxidation and reduction changes takes place. Dear student, let us summarize whole activity. In the previous activity, after heating, copper becomes copper oxide because of oxidation. When a chemical reaction gains oxygen, it is said to be oxidized. So here what happens? Copper becomes copper oxide because it actually get oxygen, and the copper oxide now it is said to be oxidized. The black powder of copper oxide turns brown again. Then what happens? The black powder of copper oxide, it turns brown again. Why? Because here the reaction happens because of the reduction. Because of reduction, what happens? The black powder of copper oxide turns brown. In this reduction, there is a loss of oxygen. It is said to be reduced. This is how, in this activity, we can observe the changes with respect to oxidation and reduction. Dear student, let us consider examples for oxidation reaction and redox reaction. In case of oxidation reaction, when copper reacts with oxygen, copper gets oxidized and it gives rise to copper oxide. In case of redox reaction, when copper oxide reacts with hydrogen, so copper is produced, and here copper loses oxygen and hence it is known as redox reaction. Dear student, in this example we can easily understand both the chemical phenomena reduction and oxidation. Here copper oxide reacts with hydrogen and here the copper loses its oxygen and get oxidized. This is what is known as reduction. And hydrogen gains oxygen, get oxidized, and this is what is known as oxidation. This is how we can easily indicate both the reduction and oxidation in a chemical reaction. Dear student, let us consider some more examples of redox reaction. Zinc oxide reacts with carbon and produces zinc and carbon monoxide. In this reaction, zinc oxide reduced to zinc and carbon get oxidized and produces carbon monoxide. In this reaction, in second reaction, magnesium oxide reacts with hydrochloric acid. And here what happens? Hydrogen, HCl, hydrogen get oxidized, and whereas magnesium is actually get reduced. From all these examples, we can understand that in the process of oxidation, a substance gains oxygen. In the process of oxidation, what happens? Substance gains oxygen or loses hydrogen during the reaction. Whereas in process of reduction, a substance is reduced if it loses oxygen or gains hydrogen during the reaction. So this is all of about oxidation and reduction processes. Dear student, in the next session we will discuss about corrosion and rancidity.